Hello, everyone. So today we're going to talk about the perception of a shaman. And me and Ashley both are shamans in one form or another. I'm very eclectic, as so is Ashley. And we are very much our own shamans. And we talk to a lot of people who have practices that are very magical, occult, and shamanistic. So welcome back to the channel, Ashley.
Thank you for having me again.
No problem. And we're thinking about how shamans view the world, things that we see in the world that we kind of reflect on inwardly. I'll go ahead and give an experience. So one experience I'd like to talk about is I was sitting at a restaurant the other day. I was inside and I was gazing out the window while I was eating, and I saw this hornet that was on the sidewalk, but a little off to the side, and he was kind of it looked like he was trying to figure out if there's food around on the ground, but then he would just like wipe his face and kind of get fed up and fly up a little bit, and then fly back down because he wasn't committed, and then he'd just kind of look around a little bit more, and then he'd fly up again and come back down, and then eventually he got up the I guess the inward strength to finally fly off. I started thinking about one hornet from another. A lot of hornets probably act the exact same. They probably do the exact same things, and they look alike to us. When you observe human beings passing this hornet on the sidewalk, I started to think about, are human beings incredibly similar if looked at from a third person point of view? Now, we are human beings, so it's hard for us to perceive ourselves. It's hard for us to really look at ourselves from a third person disassociated point of view. But if we were to look at ourselves that way, through a non-human, I guess you could say, sight or bias, how would we look to something else? Now, as these humans are passing the hornets, I started watching all of these people, and I started to realize that no matter if people look different on the outside, they were doing very similar things. I can kind of see what was going through their heads. They were so focused on where they needed to be and what has gone on through their day. A lot of people look down. It's really strange because you don't see a lot of people look up on the regular, but you do see people looking down constantly or constantly focused on whatever's going on in their head as far as focusing on what they need to do and what they have done that day, without really perceiving the environment around them. And I started to really see that despite people looking different, people acted different, not just externally, but within their own mindscape, within what the thoughts that came to mind that they held throughout the day, and what they were focused on. It was like nobody really stood up to see what's around them. They were so focused on their thought obsessions. And throughout the day, we have these thought obsessions like, okay, this is what I need to do. This is what I need to do. This is what I need to do. Very few people step back and say, and really look at the whole scape of things and really look at themselves from a third person point of view to where they're like, okay, where am I at in life? Why am I here? And what is my connection to everything else? So what I started to imagine is that these human beings could have been like gods. They weren't gods, but as above, so below. So just imagine human beings as gods walking past this hornet, and then the hornet is actually human beings. Unless the hornet does anything to get noticed, unless the hornet does something out of the usual thing that hornets do, then these gods would not have noticed it. If human beings are the same way, if we don't go out of our way to be spiritual, to connect to the gods, to connect to the divine, to connect to that which is beyond and further above, then it won't notice us, and we have no link. So you have to connect on a regular basis as a shaman. So, Ashley, is there an experience that you'd like to share as far as an experience that of shamanic perception, if you will, perception of a shaman?
Yeah, so for example, when I go out into nature, I tend to go into a state of communion, and I will notice, like, within the leaves and the bark of the tree, I'll see faces, and I can usually feel an energetic resonance within the tree or within the leaf. And it's like I can actually feel like the spirit or the soul of the tree when I'm interacting with it. And it's weird because I will see it almost like a humanoid type, like an anthropomorphized face in the bark of the tree. And I don't know if it's ancestors or if it's just nature spirits or what's coming through, but I can interact with them. And then if I go to the same tree multiple times, like I can start to develop kind of a relationship with that tree. I've also seen things like that in other types of objects that are not out in nature. Even when I'm like in the city, I'll like look at a brick wall or something and I'll see faces or different like sacred geometrics. And it's like I'm tapping into this deeper level of reality, even just like in daily life when I'm doing my daily business or whatever, going about my business.
Yeah, we are surrounded by sacred geometry, and a lot of the time it's very recognizable just because in our our natural structures that human beings tend to make, a lot of them is based on Roman columns, Roman style buildings, the kind of the kind of buildings that Rome in its heyday in the Pax Romana would build on a regular basis before they fell. Um, there's a lot of sacred geometry in that. There's a lot of squares, obviously. There's a lot of polygons, and there's a lot of formations of pillars. But if we look at nature in and of itself, we have the Fibonacci code, I think, the Fibonacci spiral. What's it called?
Fibonacci, Fibonacci sequence.
That's what it is. And you have this sequence appearing again and again and throughout nature. It's really this might sound strange. It's really inspiring to look at even a leaf and just to see the regularity of the formation of the veins in a leaf, or to even look at to look at a certain stone and see how it kind of grew from its original base into this spiral based on examining the mineral. We see this connection between all things of expansion that seems from the outside when not looking closely like it's random, like it's chaotic. But when we look closely at anything, there is actually a symmetry that really exists in all things, whether it be life or mineral or gases, solids, space itself. There is planets and suns and stuff in space. But the more we look um, in the infinitesimal, we start to realize that the infinitesimal and the infinite kind of meet. It's more of a circle than a line. Something getting smaller or bigger, it's kind of like all things meet, and reality becomes much less certain because it's a circle that we have to view ourselves as being on a certain point in, but nothing is better or worse.
Yeah.
It's not a comparative in that way. It's either more expansive, less expansive. But then even when we realize that circle, we realize that neither one is true. There's no way to say that something is more or less. Go ahead.
Well, the Fibonacci sequence, it starts as a fine point and then it just mathematically, it just goes larger and larger and it shapes like a G, so like for gratitude. And so it makes me think like about gratitude with being alive and experiencing everything and the oneness of everything and coming from that place of love and gratitude because it literally shapes like a G.
Yeah,
It's
that
for
makes
me.
sense. It's kind of infinite in all directions. There's actually this book that I was reading a while back that was called Infinite in All Directions. I highly recommend it. But there is, it's kind of like a Klein bottle. There is no differentiated surface on which someone can say this is the inside and outside. And a Klein bottle, I'll put up a picture of it, but a Klein bottle is this bottle that kind of feeds into itself and then comes out. And there's no beginning or end, and there's no inside or outside because everything is connected. I kind of think life and really consciousness is that way. We can choose to be conscious since we are sentient beings. We can choose to be conscious of one thing or another. When we choose to be conscious of our materialistic lives, um, we are not taking full. We're not taking the full. I guess you can say human potential to its greatest degree. We are focused on those mindsets that were kind of forced onto us. The job that we have to get, our culture that we live in, what religion we're a part of. We're not we're not trying to see ourselves as an individual conscious being with the potential to imagine anything and to realize anything based on our ability to perceive, and perception is what we have to work on as a shaman.
Yeah. As a shamanist, like even what you said right there, I'm constantly building connections with things. So you said that, and I started imagining the toroidal field, which goes around the earth, but we all have a toroidal field around ourselves also, and it's like an endless loop on each side, and it's almost like an infinity looking thing, but the movement is different. And just part of the shamanic daily perception of things is making the connections between things and looking at the as above, so below, and the microcosm and the macrocosm, and just we have this wisdom that we are tapped into, and everybody has the potential to tap into the wisdom. It's just when you're more of a shaman or a shamanist, it's like you're there all the time and you're contemplating. I mean, I have to consciously turn it off, whereas other people have to consciously turn it on. I have to be like, okay, that's enough. I'm going to turn it off for now. So.
I feel the same way. I have to turn it off constantly because even if I buy food, let's say I buy a package of tofurkey and I'm just eating a package of tofurkey, I'll look at the products like really close. I'll look at the packaging and I'll start to see all of these patterns and I'll start to really contemplate how this piece of food got here and where the packaging came from and where it going through my body and where it's going to go after. It's like every piece of information regarding this one piece of matter, I just start to consider like instantly. It's not like a long process. And then I just have to be able to turn that off and just to kind of be a normal person, because then I can just get lost in this process of where it's going to go, where it's come from for anything, really.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same way. Like one time when I still ate meat, because I only eat fish. I'm like a pescatarian basically, but when I mostly eat vegan, but yeah, like I was looking at this bologna, I think it was, or hot dogs, and I thought of all the suffering and the repercussions and all the different things connected to it. And that wasn't just one time, it was every single time I would try and eat one, I would think of all the different things connected to it. But also the patterns, like I see patterns all over the place. Like I'll see cars driving and I'll notice like the spokes in the wheels and I'll be like, wow, that's making this geometric pattern. And I just look at like, I'll see pentagrams and things. I'm like, whoa, that's a pentagram. And do sheriffs know that they're basically wearing, like I think, is it the Star of David most of the time, or the Solomon seal? I see these.
A lot of the time it looks like the Chaos Star, which has those arrows.
Yeah.
That's actually that pops up a lot in Western culture, even in spokes of tires, for instance.
Yeah.
I think there's some things that we do by accident. Like a lot of people just do it subconsciously without really thinking about what they're doing, but they're trying to manifest that by subconsciously. So
exactly, and that's what I've also pondered when I've seen these geometric places. I'm like, is this something that's kind of conscious with some people that initially create it and design the design, or is it just something popping up from the collective? And I tend to think it's more of like the collective conscious probably coming up.
I think shamans and shamanesses, I just kind of call them male and female shamans. I think that with us, we naturally look at things like that, but it's very easy to tap into the united subconscious of humanity for us. And we do have to turn it off in order to have a regular life, because we just can't relate to normal people from that constant state of shamanic perception. The perception of a shaman is not an easy one, even if it is a very beneficial one as far as realization and enlightenment, self-enlightenment. So my next question is, do you think it makes us more sensitive to not eat meat and to not eat animal products? Do you think that makes us more sensitive as shamans?
I think. Okay, so as far as that goes, they're not looking at the karma involved and things like that, because if I think of karma with food in general, there's so much karma just from being in that we live in. So not going into all of that, I think that you're gonna spiritually, if you're eating meat, there is a level where I can be just as open when I eat meat. I've never had an issue with the openness part. However, I am more tapped into pain and suffering. So I actually become hyper sensitive to like the people in Africa who are like, it's like I become even more connected to suffering. It's like, okay, you're going to eat this meat. The spirits or the gods or consciousness, whatever, we're going to make you more sensitive to all the pain and suffering on the planet. So for me, it hasn't done the whole thing of making me more magically or spiritually inclined by not eating meat or just eating fish. For me, I just am like a little less connected to the suffering to an uncomfortable point, because I used to be so uncomfortably connected to suffering that it was like I'd be weeping all the time, because I'm like, oh, these people are starving and, torture and all this. So I think it affects your consciousness in that way, At least for me.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I definitely respect that. I think that it dulls your senses. Not even getting into the karmic side of it, I do think that it dulls your senses because it's a sensory overload because you're taking in that chemical suffering. Not even talking about the karmic or consciousness, that is still in that meat, but just the chemical makeup of meat, all that suffering they experience throughout their lives, and definitely at the end, especially when it comes to modern day slaughterhouses, that is just so much trauma that actually transfers to our physiology that will numb our senses because it's sensory shock that we can't even really identify because we don't really know what's happening, but it's sensory shock. So it makes our spiritual senses more dull and our regular senses.
So I think maybe for you and I, or just for other people, maybe there are two ways that it can be experienced. Maybe for some people, it's so much trauma to bring into their essence that they shut down emotionally when they're ingesting it. And then for other people, it makes them, like for me, it didn't make me more open spiritually. It made me more connected to the emotional pain body of the planet, if that makes sense. So the collective pain on the planet, it was like I get thrown into it more if I connect. If that makes any sense, I don't know how to put it.
That
It
makes sense.
didn't, yeah, it didn't dull any of my spiritual senses. It just made me, if anything, more connected to shadow and sadness than I like. So.
I think in some ways we definitely had similar experiences, and I think that in other ways we had very opposite experiences with what we consume. But at any rate, I think that we'll go ahead and end the video there. Thank you very much for being on the channel, Ashley. I greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. Anybody out there has any questions about anything that we talked about, feel free to shoot down in the comment section below. Myself and Ashley will take a look, see if we can answer them for you. I hope that this video made a lot of sense to you out there, and if it didn't, feel free to let us know. At any rate, I'll see all of you on the channel in the future.